After the war, I was in the army. I hadn't got the brains to do anything else, and so I was a soldier from the start. And that was it. We went to France in about October '39, and went through the phony war, as so many other people did. I don't think there's anything interesting in that to enlarge on. And then come May 1940, after, what was it, 18 days of complete chaos, I finished up being a prisoner. And off we went into prison.
Were you captured in the Calais?
No. I was in what was then 5th Division, which wasn't in the first lot that went up into Belgium. The first 4 divisions went up, and we went up later. And by the time we got up to Belgium, the first 4 divisions were being pushed back again. So they swung us out of it and put us down to Vimy, actually, near Arras, because the Germans were coming in there. And we had a small battle, but actually very bloody, just outside Arras. I suppose it's the first time anyone ever met Rommel, but we didn't know that at the time. And then pulled back from Vimy and was sent straight back again up towards Ypres, where we were to hold the Ypres Canal against the advance of the mighty Germans. Well, the Ypres Canal, which loomed so large on the GHQ ideas, in fact we motored over it twice before we found it, because it was only about 4 feet deep and about 2 feet wide, and didn't really provide any sort of thing. And it was there, almost within sight of Ypres, that I was taken prisoner. And then they marched us from there across Belgium. It took about 10 days, maybe, yes, 10 days to a fortnight, into Germany, and then from there by cattle truck down to Laufen in Bavaria, off Lake 7C, I think that was, which was our first experience of prison, which was not very nice in actual fact.
Very crowded.
Well, that wasn't the sort of worst part about it. It was fairly crowded, because being a subaltern, and a very young subaltern, I did share a room with 99 other people. No, 98. Because they were 3-tier bunks, and I think there must have been 33 3-tier bunks. It wasn't all that crowded. The worst aspect was it was in an old building. I think it belonged to the Bishop of Salzburg or something. And therefore we were on the 3rd floor. And really one hadn't got the strength to get up from the ground floor to the top floor for the miserable bit of food that they did give us, because we were actually very close to starving then. There were nothing like Red Cross parcels. The Hun didn't believe in giving us a lot of food. In fact, he didn't believe in giving us any at all, really. And so we didn't get enough food. And after being counted in the morning, one just sat and waited for enough strength to get back up to the room to get lunch, which was a bowl of soup and nothing else. And that really, I think, was the worst part of being a prisoner. And also, I mean, 1940 wasn't exactly a happy time for Britain. It was about the low point, I suppose. Shall I go on?
Yes, please do.
Well, when was it? 41. The Germans got it into their heads that some of their prisoners, their Air Force prisoners, were being sent to Canada and housed in fortresses. And this they thought was terrible, that anyone should be housed in a fortress. So they reckoned that the British prisoners ought to be housed in a fortress. And so a certain number of us, I can't remember now how many, were sent up to Poland into these, they were sort of 19th century fortresses that had been built, I don't know what, defending against what, but they're semi-underground, and when I say semi-underground, there's an enormous great moat, dry moat around this thing, and in the middle was this mound of earth in which there were several rooms and things, and I think in the original idea, in the middle of it, they would house several sort of field guns and things which would be run up onto the top to fire at people and die back again. That had obviously long gone by the thing, but we were in these things, and we were in rooms very like a sort of bit of the underground, in that they were curved roof. And the room that we were in, it was a double-tier bed, but it was 15 in each tier, which was, now that was crowded, I promise you, and we were shut in these rooms after 10 o'clock, I think it was. The place was full of fleas, which is not surprising, and so that meant that sleep at night was absolutely impossible, because there was always somebody scratching, and on a 15-tier bed, one person scratching meant the whole thing zigzagged around. And I found to my joy, actually, that I was, and I think I still am, immune to fleas. Whereas some people had the most terrible things. I mean, one chap I remember, his legs were so covered in sores, which he'd mainly caused by scratching, but I mean they were sores, they were contiguous and bloody and suppurating and what you will, just because he was really bitten by fleas. But the only time I had was one morning I got up and, pulling my shirt on, I realised I had about 4 bites on my stomach and a dead flea.
Perhaps they were allergic to you.
They were allergic to me, very definitely, which I thought was lovely. And we were there not for very long, and then the Germans relented a little, and they sent about half of us to another camp in Poland, similar, but in actual fact much, because we were only half the number, I think we were only in 2-tier beds then, and very much easier life altogether. And in fact I think the camp guards were probably frontline soldiers, and so they treated us much better than the older ones we'd had before. And that was it.
That would have been Thorn.
That was Thorn. Posen was the first one. Posen, I forget his number. And then Thorn was the second one, from which there were some fairly good escapes. Some very good escapes, actually. Well, Grizz, I think, got out of... It may have been Posen he got out of. It could have been Thorn, but he's certainly from Poland.
I think John Davis made an attempt there as well. Was that Thorn?
I don't think John was there.
I thought he tried to get out over the roof, or maybe that was Posen as well. He was certainly in one of them.
I don't remember, and I'm surprised you say that, because John, being a sailor, wouldn't have been with us, I don't think, because he was entirely army in both those camps. I don't remember any sailors being either Thorn or Posen.
Perhaps I've got the camp wrong, but he was certainly in one of those. He was involved in the handcuffing business that they did.
Well, that's much later on, and that was Eichstätt time.
Oh, maybe I've got it wrong.
And no, I'm pretty sure the thing that I forget when John was put in prison. I don't think I ever really knew, but there was a naval camp, I think, up on the Baltic coast somewhere, and I think that might have been him, but I'm pretty certain, I couldn't swear on it because my memory is pretty appalling at the best of times. I'm pretty certain there were no one other than army in either Posen or Thorn. I think one of the best escapes, one of the most remarkable, you may have been told this before, 2 chaps got out it was found that the rubbish cart had a toolbox underneath the back axle, which would take two bodies, and it was used for quite a number. Well, I say 3 or 4 people got out this way anyhow, and one couple, I can't remember their names now, they got out of this thing, and when they were out in the open air, they dropped out of the box at the back and went their various ways. And walking down the streets of, I think it was Thorn, they saw a German patrol coming, German police patrol, so they ran for it and split up, and actually both ran and got on to the railway, and both got on separate trains. And one of them, Alan Cox's, that's right, that's his name, he got on his train and it went off at a rate of knots going south, and he thought, yummy, yummy, this is marvellous. I'm going to be in Switzerland by tea time. Anyhow, it went on and on and on, and darkness fell, and he began to have his doubts, so he eventually decided to get off the train when he saw a village coming and find out where he was, and did this thing, jumped off the train, went into this village, which had no sign of what its name was at all. He went into the churchyard to see if there was any possibility of a name on tombstones, and managed to knock over a vast pile of tombstones, which worried him a bit. So he left the thing and he caught the next train, and off he went and went to sleep, and he woke up, and as it was coming into a town, he got off and hid up and then walked into the town. He was back in Thorn.
Really?
And he went straight back in. The other chap, he went to sleep on his train, and he woke up to a strange motion of the train and realised he was on the ferry as steaming into Sweden, and he was back within about 48 hours. Forget his name, he was a Scotsman. He was about one of the very first to get home. But that was Thorn. Well, from there they moved us to the camp we all ought to have escaped from, Biberach, down near the Swiss border. It was only about 50 miles from the border, and that actually was a very comfortable camp. I think it had been a school or something, and there weren't very many of us in it, and we weren't there for very long. There were several escapes from there. One was to do with the bathhouse, which was outside the gate, and people would fiddle about, would take in sort of escaping clothes into the bathhouse and get out while they were having a shower, because it was not proper baths, it was just showers. And a couple of chaps actually did get away from the camp, but were re-caught. Shan Blair, the chap in the Seaforths, he saw some orderlies loading palliasses to take out of the camp, and without thinking he quickly got into this thing and was wheeled out of the camp. He got home, and then they dug a tunnel actually from the shithouse, terrible tunnel, because I mean it wasn't exactly sanitary, it wasn't at all salubrious, but it broke surface, and one chap at least got out of there, I think more than one, but one actually did and certainly got home. I was trying to think of his name the other day, I can't remember it, but he was a dedicated soldier, I think, really, you might say, because he wanted to get home to go on fighting, and he was killed quite soon afterwards in some battle. Right, that was Biberach, and I think it was Biberach. No, I was going to say it was Biberach I met Pat Ferguson, but I think, no, I met up with him in Thorn or Posen. And we had great fun with a crown and anchor board, which someone sent in, and Pat and I played banker on this crown anchor board, and after playing it for about a couple of hours, I suppose, we'd not only won everybody's money, but we had won the board as well. And we kept the board throughout the war, and we used to trot it out about once a year, and we never failed to make an absolute fortune with it. It's a wicked game if you're a banker, if you're not a banker, I suppose. Right. Biberach, they then sent us to Warburg, I think. Yes, I think it was Warburg. And I think it was on the trip from Biberach to Warburg that we really saw the German at his best. Actually terribly like the Israelis at the moment, because one little chap of ours decided he would make a break for it and duck under the train as we were loading it and run for it. And the Hun just shot him straight away in cold blood, pong, dead of the load, and made us step over the body. When I say us, I wasn't part of that bit, but the people that were loading had to step over him and get on. It meant nothing to them. Warburg, as I say, was this enormous camp. That had everybody in it, sailors, airmen and soldiers. I think there were about 2,000 in it, and mainly hutties. And most of the huts were wooden huts, but built on a brick foundation. So if you pulled up the floorboards, you could look into about this high, about 2 feet high, onto the earth beneath. And it was an invitation to dig a tunnel. And I don't know how many huts there were in that camp, but I think every hut had its tunnel started from it. The Hun got onto it very quickly, actually, and formed his ferret setup. There were always a couple of his experts who, dressed in overalls, wandered around the camp at will and would go under every hut and look for these holes. And they eventually developed a very high degree of knowledge of the earth, and they could recognize not only where earth had been disturbed under a hut, but if they found earth outside, which had been disposed of, they could tell you which hut it came from, or jolly nearly. And they're very clever at that. And as I say, every hut had its tunnel. Those nearest the wire obviously were absolute honeycomb with them. And you've got some wonderful setups. You've got a tunnel which would go down and towards the wire and be found. And the Hun would block it up, generally at the entrance. So within days another tunnel would be started to go down and join that tunnel and go on. And so on. In fact, one I remember going down, there were about 3 different levels. It was almost impossible not to get lost down these bloody things. And some of them went some fairly good distances before they were discovered. There was one tragedy there when they decided to use electric light in the tunnel, which is fatal really. Well, it was fatal because it was homemade cable. There was copper wire off the Red Cross parcels, which they wrapped in brown paper and suspended along the top of the tunnel to light it up. And overnight one of these wires dropped into the bottom of the tunnel where there was a puddle, and the first chap coming along in the morning into it died, was electrocuted, and they had to blow the tunnel to get the body out, which was a great shame. Anyhow, Pat and I, who were in the brick block, which was the only hut in the camp that hadn't got a wooden floor and earth underneath. It was a brick block, long brick block, and fairly close to the wire actually. We were very disappointed because we couldn't see that we could start a tunnel because there was nothing to dig into. And then, and I never know quite whose original idea it was, but we decided that we could make a trap door in the brick walls of this thing, and not the wall, the walls, and dig through that. And so someone made a very beautiful trap door out of brick mounted on wood, and we started a tunnel from there, leading across under the path and into some newly built huts just outside the wire. And it really was a complete amateur show. We hadn't got really any idea. We had a homemade compass with a razor blade poised on a bit of tin, on a pin, and that gave us the direction that we had to go. And then we took it down below ground and said, we'll dig this way. We couldn't keep the level right because we hadn't got a spirit level or anything like that, and we used a bottle. Well, you've got a lot of error in a bottle. And so in actual fact, the first bit was fairly wonderful because although we didn't know it, we were digging slightly down, and of course if you do that, all the bad air goes back and the good air comes in underneath, and so it was quite possible to work at the face there quite happily. But when we eventually realized that we were going down and we would have to come up to get to the thing, then we were in dead trouble because we were breathing appalling air. And when we thought we'd gone far enough, and it was all hit and miss. I mean, we tried some wonderful trigonometrical ideas about where we were going and how far we'd gone. Anyhow, I'm digging the thing I hopefully going to break in one of these new buildings. And this was in daylight, and I suddenly realized I had struck daylight, and I couldn't work it out. And we sent back to the people watching in the building, and they said, well, yes, you've broken the surface, but it's in the middle of the path where the Germans walk up and down, which was pretty worrying. Only just, actually. We were about 6 inches short of the building, but it was a fairly vital 6 inches. Anyhow, by then, actually, Pat and I were digging it at the time. We were absolutely knackered. We really were. I mean, digging with all that, with the complete lack of oxygen. And the oxygen was so short. We used acetylene lamps. Do you know acetylene?
Yeah.
Because we in the brick blocks there was no electricity, and we had these acetylene lamps, so we got these lamps and we got the carbide to go with it. And you normally get a lovely orange flame, fishtail flame. And certainly to begin with digging, you got this light, and then gradually the orange flame got smaller and smaller and smaller, until at the very end you just got a little blue line, which is all that was left. And if you knocked it over, and therefore it went out, you couldn't strike a match to light it because the match wouldn't burn. You had to put the match on the head of the thing and strike it on there, so the red hot thing actually struck it match and got the light. And I mean, that was the sort of.
So how long did you find you could work in those conditions?
At the end, it was about 10 minutes, because I mean it really was, and we were exhausted absolutely. A party from the next door hut, some very charming individuals indeed, more or less pulled Pat and I out of the tunnel and said, look, we'll finish this for you, and went down and did so, dug it through for us. And
was the food situation any better by then?
the food situation was much better by then. Not that the Germans had improved very much, but we were getting a fairly regular supply of Red Cross parcels. And I mean, it was only the Red Cross parcels that really kept us alive. I mean, even with Red Cross parcels, one was perilous close to subsistence level. take them away and you really were on starvation ration.
So you got into the new building then?
Got into the new building, and now what was the next thing? Oh, the difficulty there was that the new building, as I say, it was outside the wire and it ran away from the wire, so one had about another 20 yards of cover, if you like. But it was certainly well within sight of the watchtower on the gate, which was only about 50 yards away. And we had noticed that the Germans, when they came on at dark, came on with dogs and went through these huts. And so there was no question that we could sort of lie up in these huts or even get through in the dark. And so it was decided that Pat and I would break the tunnel and see what we could do. And we duly broke it. I forget now why we had to do it in daylight. There was some very good... Oh, that's right, because of course they doubled the guards on the wire at dark, so it had to be done, and they also put patrols out. So it was decided that Pat and I would go through and break, and we would be covered by ghosts in camp for 24 hours. And if we got away, the next night another 6 would go through, and if they got away, because the idea was that we should go through and walk nonchalantly away from the place until we were out of sight of the watchtower and lie up in a further hut further away before walking out of the main gate. And this was the thing. If that had happened, if the next 6 had done, then I think about 30 odd chaps would have gone through and taken a chance. Anyhow, Pat and I got through, dug the tunnel, covered it up, put a little trap door in, it was beautiful, and walked along to the end of the hut, or crawled along, and then we walked away looking as if we were workmen. And I do assure you, very, very eerie, knowing that the sentry box was watching you, and there could be a shot any moment. Anyhow, there wasn't. We got into this hut and we lay there for a bit, and when it was dark we left and got away, got out of the camp area. The unfortunate thing was that next night these 6 chaps that got through, we'd always been told that one of the things that gave British prisoners, particularly officer prisoners of war, away was the fact they did tend to march in step. And so to stop this, one of the couple that went away developed a limp. And it so happened, bloody sentry in the Mirador happened to glance over and he saw this limping chap with his mate, and he had a friend, a workman friend with a limp, and he said, "Oh yes, that's old Hans, I'll go and see him." Oh. And so when he was relieved, he walked over to the hut, and of course instead of finding his chum, he found the 6 people. So that was that one blown. But anyhow, Pat and I got out, and it then developed actually into almost high comedy. Warburg had been the scene of a battle about the time of Queen Anne, I think. In fact, there's a memorial that is still there that you can see, and it was where I think it was the Duke of Cumberland, or one of those cavalry commanders, who had his wig shot off just as he was about to go into the charge, and he said to hell with that, and he went at the enemy bald-headed, from which comes the saying, go at the enemy bald-headed. Anyhow, cut a long story short, Pat and I crossed that thing, and we'd been told that if we went on a little way we would find a railway line, and in actual fact you could hear this railway line from the camp, and it went north and south, and it was on a slight slope, and if you took the southbound trains you were all set for Switzerland, if you took the northbound train, next stop Holland was the idea. And we were assured that they came through about every 20 minutes, that being on a hill they were slow enough to jump on, hitch a lift, and that even the ones coming downhill generally stopped at this level crossing and I'd want to get on. Well, it wasn't so, because we got there and I think we waited about 2 hours before anything happened, and then we heard a train coming and we got all ready, and a train came down the hill and it must have been doing about 50. It really went whistling past, and nothing came up the hill at all. And then a little later another train did go by, and no, that's right, then one went up, and that was going at about 50. And after about 4 of these things had gone through and dawn was approaching, we reckoned that this wasn't on. So we walked on down the line, and about 3 or 4 miles out we went into a wood to lie up for the night, lie up for the day rather, in hiding. And there I had the most incredible experience. We crawled into a bramble bush, I think it was, to get out of cover, and it was just getting light, and there was a sound of footsteps, and I was lying there, and footsteps went all round us, and then something poked me in the back, and I more or less sat up with my hands up saying, "Come on, don't shoot, don't shoot." It was a bloody fox. Cannot think what it was doing, what it was thinking of. The only thing I can think of is I'd pinched a pair of Air Force trousers, because they looked more civilian than what I was wearing, which had leather bits round the back of the heel, just often wearing out. And whether that had got wet and was smelling like something worth eating that had drawn the fox over, I don't know, but I can assure you if you sit up and see a fox at close range, it looks horribly like an Alsatian. I thought I was going to be savage. Anyhow, that went away and we were all right. And when night fell, when darkness fell, we set off again and we followed the railway line again. And as we got nearer to Cassel, we had more and more trains coming along, so eventually we managed to jump onto one. And we've been taught the way to jump onto a train. You jump onto the front of it, because if it swings you back, you're all right. But if you jump on the back, it'll swing you around and you drop onto the line and it's curtains. Anyhow, we jumped onto this thing, got onto it, into this thing, and sort of sat down, and a screaming of brakes, and it drew to a halt. And we could hear someone walking along the line and doing something. Anyhow, when we got out, because it was obviously going to stay there, and caught another one, and the same thing happened. And the third time it happened, the penny dropped. And what was happening, these trains were coming in, and someone was going around and writing on the little waybill their destination. And from there they would be taken off into the marshalling yards and made up into other trains.
I see.
So, I mean, we reckoned, well, this is no place for us. We can't wait to be shoved into the ground. They'd find us. We want to be on the other side of the town, where these trains are leaving. So we walked on until we suddenly realised we were about to walk onto the main departure platform of Castle Station. Lights everywhere. Terrifying thing. And so we decided that was not on, and turned to go back. And we were very short of water. We'd used all our water bottle, and by the side of the track was a hose and a standpipe. And so Pat went with his water bottle and picked up the hose, and I got into the standpipe. And it was compressed air. It nearly blew the bottle out of Pat's hand. And we just dropped everything and ran and left this thing hissing into the night. It was quite frightening. Anyhow, we went back a bit, and found there was a turning off the main line going through a tunnel. Appeared to miss the tunnel. We thought, well, that's the answer, you see. Got into this tunnel, and then to our horror we heard a bloody train coming. And we had to lie down by the side of the track because it was quite a small tunnel. And it was really quite terrifying because as it went by, the heat out of the sort of firebox and the ash box underneath the thing, you could really feel. And it was within about 2 feet of us, I suppose, you see. Anyhow, we weathered that and got out. And we hadn't long been out of there, out of the tunnel, when a train did come by reasonably slowly, and we jumped on that, and that went off, and we thought, this is bloody marvellous, we're on. And then it stopped, and it was just getting light too, and we realised we were in the middle of another marshalling yard. We were in the middle of about 5 lines either side of trains, and it's not very funny actually calling under trains when you don't know whether they're likely to move and what you will. Anyhow, we did. We got to the edge, climbed over the fence and dropped down into the road, and we'd only walked about 100 yards when there was a German coming up towards us. And so we decided we must look as if we were German, so we said about the only German words we knew, which was the beginning of the German military communique, which is something like Der Oberkommandeur der Wehrmacht gibt bekannt. Anyhow, we got by, the chap didn't appear to be too worried, and then to our joy we realised that we were coming up to the Autobahn, and so we lay up on the edge of the Autobahn, which is a very good place. It's rather like our own motorways. The edges of these motorways are sort of sanctuaries, if you like. They're not used by people. You don't get a lot of people there, so they're very, very quiet. And so when that evening came, we started off walking on the Autobahn, reckoning it was going to be good walking, and in fact we did very, very well, because walking on the Autobahn, absolutely nothing on it obviously because it's wartime, we were doing a good 20 miles a night, which is quite good walking, and easy to get off in the morning because almost anywhere there's cover, you see. And we got too bloody cocky because we reckoned that we could start earlier than dark, and we did start to sort of go about an hour before it got really dark, and that worked for 2 or 3 days, and we were doing very, very well indeed. And then we came to one of these enormous viaducts going across the whole valley, I think about a mile, and it was broad daylight, and because we got so cocky by then it wasn't true, we thought, well, right, we'll go and lie out, and then we thought, no we won't, we'll walk across the valley and pick it up the other side. And we walked off down the hill and looked to see if anyone was coming, and dropped out of our hedge straight onto a German patrol. We could have run for it, we should have run for it, but we didn't.
How long had you been out at that time?
I think it was about 14, 15 days.
Good run.
It was a very nice holiday, what the way we regarded it. And they slapped us in solitary and sent for the camp people who picked us up again.
What had you been doing for food during that time?
Oh no, that was another thing that was pretty awful. You see, you got lots of people inside the camp who would give you advice about what to do. I mean, like this business of catching the train to Holland, perfectly simple. And when you get to the border, go to the church, go and knock on the presbytery door next door and ask for Harry or something. And then you were put on the underground. And this is what one was told. It didn't really quite work like that ever. And one of the things was, you want a subsistence ration. And we were told what we could live on, which was so many ounces of this, so many ounces of that per day. And one of the things was, the greatest thing was, to mix oatmeal with treacle, and I think I don't know whether we baked it or not. Perhaps not. It was just you mix this thing with. Yes, we did bake it. That's right. And so you've got these cakes, and one's supposed to be able to exist on something like 4 ounces of this a day, and 1 square of chocolate. This was another great thing. And we'd made this stuff up long before we escaped, and we had enough, I think, for about I think 3 weeks, maybe more. I can't remember now. And the first day, I know, when we opened this thing up, it was absolutely the most shattering thing I've ever seen. It had yellow mould where everything had rotted, and I mean, we picked off as much yellow mould as possible, but it tasted appalling. And we had to we didn't throw it away because we kept it as long as we could, picking off the yellow mould. I mean, that filled the time in, which is a good thing. But it was not very good. We were actually fairly hungry. We did manage to raid 1 or 2 allotment gardens and pick up lettuces and some radishes. And we even boiled some potatoes at one period, which wasn't bad, but they were nearly raw by the time we got to eat them. There was one bad thing where we picked what we thought was lettuce, and it turned out to be young spinach, which is pretty bitter. But nonetheless, we got 1 or 2 things, but not a lot.
Was it difficult? Were you just walking at night?
That was the idea.
So the days were just spent hidden away under bushes and so on, which must have been quite
boring.
Boring, if nothing else.
Deadly boring.
Yeah. Did you manage to sleep at all?
Oh yes, one did, most definitely. Because I mean, when you first settled down and you were still warm and tired after having done 20 odd miles, I certainly dropped straight off. But after about a couple or 3 hours, one started to get cold, even in the middle of June, and woke up again. But
You got some sleep.
Oh, we did get some sleep.
But then you were sent back to
Warburg.
Yeah.
Well, you had one thing which I don't know whether Pat Ferguson told you about this, because it worried him a lot actually. One of the places we laid up in, and it was stupid of us to do it, but we did, was one of these shooting boxes which the Germans put up on stilts, a little sort of wooden hut where they got up in the evenings to shoot roebuck and this sort of thing. And we went up into one of these things, which was really very stupid, because if anyone had come, we were done. Anyhow, it was nice and warm and nice and dry, and we went there. And hanging in the roof was a wasp's nest. And out of sheer boredom, I watched this nest, and I started counting them out, and counting them in, and counting them out. And I got to the stage where I reckoned there were no wasps in it. So I took it down. Pat was in a terrible state. He really couldn't understand what was going on at all. Anyhow, it got over there. Yes, then they took us back to Warburg. Eventually they sent us off to our spell of solitary confinement in a French camp, because there wasn't enough room in Warburg to deal with all the solitary escaping people. And they sent us off to this place at Zoest, which was a French camp, which was worth a guinea a minute, really, because the guards were extremely casual. The French orderlies used to come in, and although we weren't supposed to have any cigarettes or anything like that, they came in every day with packets of Gauloises, and so smoking was no problem at all. And the food was quite good. It was sort of French food, and it wasn't too bad at all. We used to beg to be shut in our solitary cells, because this wretched guard commander would stay talking with us outside the cells for hours, When we wanted to get back and have a quick cigarette, you see. Anyhow, that passed off all right. Then Warburg to Eichstätt, and it was Eichstätt that all this business of handcuffing and how bad the Canadians had been and this, that and the other. And the Eichstätt tunnel took place. And I won't go into that because it's been so well publicised. Again, Pat and I had quite a party when we escaped from there, because we did manage to stay out longer than anyone else. And it had its little ups and downs. One was crossing the Danube. We finished up at the Danube. Where the hell was it? I was there only last year, actually. I didn't go down to the bridge, but there was this bridge across it, and we reckoned that it would be foolish to cross the bridge because they'd certainly have a guard on it. We went down to this thing, and there, tied up just with a chain, was a punt. And so we got on this punt and cast loose. No paddles, absolutely nothing at all, not a rudder, nothing. I don't know why we did it, but we cast loose, and the Danube there, I suppose, is about, well, certainly a quarter of a mile wide. Could have been even bigger. And we could hear the current changing note as it went over sandbanks and this sort of thing. Anyhow, it finished us up on the far side, where we caught some branches and pulled ourselves onto the bank. But we didn't quite know where we were. And we walked on. By then we picked up another chum of ours, a chap called Elms Neal. So
From Eichstätt?
he was Eichstätt, yes. He'd been on the same tunnel, but so we went on, the three of us, and we were doing quite well actually. And we came to a crossroad, very, very dark crossroad, and it's remarkable how when the sixth sense told one things, we all stopped because we reckoned there was trouble on that crossroad, and almost immediately we were challenged. And so we turned and ran for it, and there was bang, bang behind. And that meant we were getting faster and faster. And I remember thinking to myself, thank God that wasn't a shotgun. Well, in actual fact, it was, because the third chap, Elms Neal, he actually was hit by a pellet, which lodged in a tin of bully beef that he had. But Pat and I got away with it. Well, Elms dropped off and went away. Pat and I went on, and we had about 3 more days at liberty. But we then realised, I forget how we realised, that we were in dead trouble because we were between a very big river, the Lech, and Augsburg, which even then, in wartime, was a fairly biggish town. And no way could we cross the Lech again. What at all, and to go round was going to be a very tedious business. Anyhow, before we could make up our mind, we walked straight into a German policeman, and it was a bright moonlight night. And again, we ought to have run for it, but actually we'd been up for a fortnight again that time, and it had rained solidly the whole time, and we were absolutely soaked, and we were extremely low. We had better food that time. I can't remember what it was, but we'd lived better. But nonetheless, we were extremely low.
The weather must have played a great part in...
Oh, that was bloody awful. It really was. I mean, we would lie up in trees, but I mean the trees just dripped on you, and the trees were covered in lichens and what you will. They took us to the Gestapo prison there, and actually it was very comfortable. They put us in the cells, and I remember remarking to Pat as we were putting in these cells, people had put their shoes outside. Well, I think their shoes were taken away from them, obviously, stop you running away. And outside the cells next to ours was a pair of tiny little shoes, and a pair of enormous brogues. So we said, that's some honeymoon couple in there. Next morning, when we were all liberated, and given an extremely good breakfast, I must admit, the tiny little shoes were being worn by a small boy. The great brogues being worn by a Hitler Mädel, a great big strapping girl. They took us off to fingerprinters, and I hadn't realised until then how difficult it is actually to take fingerprints.
Really?
Well, it is actually, if you think about it. You've only got to move your fingers a fraction, and you're getting a smudged impression. And this was a poor little girl actually who was taking our photographs, because it was the weekend, it was a Sunday, and she was dressed in a white coat, and it was a fairly tidy office when we first went in, but by the time we finished, I mean, there was black ink everywhere, and 2 sets of extremely smudged prints had gone into the... But again, you're running out of stuff.
No, that's fine.
It shows how stupid we were, because we were interrogated, actually the night we were taken in, by this plainclothes chap who was quite obviously Gestapo. And he said, "And how did you cross the Danube?" And we said, "Ha, that's telling, isn't it?" And he said, "We have methods of making you talk." And we laughed. Well, having seen a lower, I wouldn't laugh now.
No.
I'd have told him everything. I'd have given him the name of the boat and everything. But there, like time, we laughed. And that was it. From there, we went back, and Colditz was our home for the next 2 years.
So you got into Colditz, what would it have been, June 43, something like that?
June 43. Yes, June, July 43, because I think the tunnel broke in June, and we were out for a fortnight, and we were held in semi-solitary for a fortnight. So I think it was July we went to Colditz.
And did everybody get captured from the tunnel?
Yes, everybody. Some within 12 hours, mostly within about 3 days. I think most of them thought that we'd made it, because we did have, I think it was 10 days we did. And we were outside the area, because the Germans turned out the whole Home Guard and everything. They did a sort of almost a practice anti-invasion thing, and they turned out everybody and manned every single track and what you will, and we'd got onto the edge of that thing by the time we were taken.
And so you arrived in Colditz? Yeah, did they?
Yeah, that's right. Land there.
At night? Or?
We arrived at night, and we got off the trains in the dark, and I think we were surprised at the number of guards, because normally there were quite a number of guards, obviously, but there seemed to be double the guards for Colditz. And we marched up to the castle. We couldn't see a thing about it, and we didn't know how the hell we were getting in and how we got in. But when we did get in through the gate into the courtyard, there was a sort of shout of welcome from the chaps who were in there, which was really very, very, very cheering. The first experience we had of Colditz was being taken for a pretty savage ride. We were put in this in what was the old police quarters, and in the morning in came a doctor in a white coat and an orderly in a white coat, and this doctor was a screaming Nazi who really did the most terrible things to us and said the most terrible things and painted people with gentian violet and was absolutely beastly, and then revealed it was Howard G. But really I think we were all taken in.
He did that on more than one occasion.
Oh yes, he did, but I mean I think he really reached his peak. And Dominic Bruce was the orderly, and none of us knew him, you see. I think actually he was within very close range of being thumped with us, because there were one or two people who were quite prepared to lose their temper, even with the Hun. And there we are. He's dead, isn't he, Howard G?
I think so.
A remarkable chap, quite remarkable.
He was a civilian, of course.
He was a civilian and had no reason to be, no need to be in prison at all. He was taken in Norway. Very, very clever, and but slightly unbalanced, I would say.
Did you find that was the case with a few people in Colditz, or the other?
Not just a few. I would have said actually almost all of us were slightly unbalanced. It was merely a question of how unbalanced, how much unbalanced one was. I mean, there were, well, you better edit this out, but Peter Tunstall was completely unbalanced, in my opinion.
He said that himself.
Well, there you are.
He said that himself.
And he wasn't alone. And I can't think really anyone who was, I suppose Willie Todd was about the most, probably about the only really balanced person in Colditz. He was a remarkable chap, he really was, quite out of the ordinary. But most of this, I mean, Barder, for example, an absolute nutter, but with a hell of a personality. The chap who had so much publicity, Mike Sinclair, he was an absolute lunatic. There was no two ways about it. He was obsessed.
Skelly Ginn actually said at one time that, in his opinion, Mike Sinclair committed suicide.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he couldn't do otherwise. No, I think actually Skelly's correct there. It was suicide, and there were a lot of like people.
Some people used it as an attempt to get home, of course.
Yes, indeed. And some were cleverer than others. The only one I really knew properly, Edmund Hannay, I was convinced he was a nutter, because he went fairly suddenly, but he was so far around the twist that I never expected to see him again. After the war, to go into the Berkeley Buttery and find him standing there was a bit of a shaker.
And was he okay?
Yes. But I think he had gone round the twist. But then I think this could happen. People could flip over and go
Most
on.
people came out of it. I suppose you had bouts of what should we call it? Depressions, which were, I don't know.
No, I don't think so, really. Well, I'm obviously, from time to time you thought, is this never going to end? But I don't believe it was a deep depression. I think most people, certainly most of the people I dealt with, live for the present. And tomorrow, yesterday wasn't too bad, and tomorrow, well, it hasn't come yet, has it? And today, well, let's go and brew a bit more alcohol. One fill one's time in as best one could.
You'd been very active in escape at all the other camps.
No, I wouldn't say that. Actually, I was active and I was very pro-escape, but mainly because I was so thick I couldn't do anything else. No, I mean that. I mean, so many of the people in prison, were not, I mean, I was a regular soldier and therefore I had nothing to lose and nothing to gain, but so many people had interrupted a promising career to fight in the thing and decided to use their time to get more qualifications or learn a bit more, what you will, and even some of those, of course, went over the top, as happened at Eichstätt. In fact, Eichstätt, it was very noticeable. The anti-escapers were very anti. They hated it, and it upset the rhythm of their life, any form of escaping.
Was it at Eichstätt that there was a note put on the door?
Yes.
That was Eichstätt?
Yes, it was.
And do you think that was one of these anti-escapers, or...?
I think it must have been. I've got no proper opinion of that, but I think it must have been that. I can't think of who else would do it. There was nothing else to lose, as it were.
Right. Going back to Colditz, if we may, was it still an international camp when you arrived, or had...
Just. I mean, when we arrived, I think the Poles had left. I think there were only one or two. The Poles were there. I think the Dutch had left, but the French and the Belgians were still there. And of course we had quite a number of Czechs who were actually serving with the British forces, RAF. But yes, certainly there were French and Belgian. They left after about a month or two.
Did you find you got involved with things like the glider or the theatre? Were you involved with any of that?
I was fairly deeply involved with the theatre because while I was at Laufen, I found that I could use a penknife and chip pieces of wood into various shapes, and I carried on doing that. By the time I got to Colditz, I sort of volunteered to help make stage props and this sort of thing, and eventually set up in what we laughingly called the paint room, where we kept all the various bits and pieces we could amass for these theatre productions. And I did a lot of carving and helped with the theatre, and it did help to pass the time enormously.
Absolutely.
We had a lot of fun.
I think Pat got involved with the glider at that stage, didn't he?
The glider was slightly later. We actually, bless them, they involved most of us in the glider. It was, I mean, I did a spell sitting in the glider workshop, stooging, and I actually carved them a mascot that's disappeared. Pity of it. No, that was the whole point about the glider. It was the greatest thing for keeping interest alive and filling in time. It was never going to be a success. I mean, I think this was accepted even by the people who were deepest involved in it. It couldn't have been a success, but by God, it got your hopes up. And
it was quite an achievement under any circumstances.
It's a hell of an achievement.
When you think of the materials that it was built with and where it was built, the circumstance or the conditions rather under which it was built, it was a hell of an achievement, really, wasn't it?
Well, it was. I mean, if you like, it wasn't all that exceptional as far as we were concerned, because one had got used to making the most out of everything. I believe, as John Beaumont would describe it, it's serendipity. You have to make things out of nothing. And by the time we came to the glider, it was natural for Bill Goldfinch and what's his name, Jack Best, to think about cutting a cupboard up to make a spar, to using these goonskins which we had as covering, and to dope it with lentils and this sort of thing. The sort of thing we were all very used to doing, and anything to sort of pass the time, really. No, it was a great achievement. I mean, you cannot take anything away from it. I was absolutely shattered when I realised that they were talking the truth when they said they could build a glider. And
talking about the the people in the castle rather than what went on. Do you remember much about the German guards, the like Eggers and Preem and Kupka?
Preem we never knew, at least Preem had gone by the time we arrived. Eggers I couldn't stand. I thought he was a slimy devil. Popka I admired. He was a Prussian, and you always got a straight answer from Popka. I had to ask him for several things for my carving and theatre things, and he would either say no straight away, and that was that, or he'd say yes, and if he said yes, you got it. And no, I liked him. But apart from that, no. The ferrets in Colditz, I cannot remember their names, but there was one big chap who I became very close to, because he was he had a relation who was also a wood carver, and so he used to come up to me carving there, and he got me actually several pieces of very nice timber to carve, some lime apart from anything else, and he got me some varnish, and he got me, I've still got a very good knife that I bought from him with a tin of cocoa. And I could hold him talking for quite some time. This was always the great thing, you see.
That wouldn't have been Gepard, would it? He was quite a chunky.
I don't think it was Gepard.
The only other one I know the name of is Shadley, the ferret.
Well, he was the ferret. Was he a big chap?
Shadley, no, it was a Dixon Hawk, they called him.
No, it wasn't him. No, I forget. He was related to Sepp Dietrich, this chap. He was a big chap. What his name was, I don't know. He wasn't Slim or Slam, they were the workmen. Slim or Slam, they were wonderful. They used to mend. We had these big porcelain stoves in most of the rooms. I mean, stoves, I don't know whether you've seen them. They stand about 6 feet high and about that square, and they're quite incredible. The coal ration that we got for them was something like 4 briquettes, about that big they are, made from brown coal, quite hopeless. And it was absolute art. You put these 4 briquettes in this stove and lit them, and you had to shut the door and shut the thing down at exactly the right moment. If you shut it down too late, all the heat was gone. If you shut it down too early, it blew the top off.
Really?
If you got it right, the heat came through this whole of this porcelain stove, and it was amazing how much heat it gave out on 4 little bricks, and that would last you till, well, middle of the night.
Really?
But as I say, if you shut the door down too early, before the stuff had burnt through fully, the top was held on by mud anyhow, just for this thing. It would blow off, and you had to send for Slim and Slam, because Slam, I think, is the German slang for mud, and they used to come and put this thing back on again.
So you spent a lot of time with your carving then?
Yes, a hell of a lot.
I think actually in Walter Morrison's book he's got some photographs of a
chess set
that you made.
Yes, that's right.
And that was all done in Colditz, wasn't it?
Yep. Yes, I did that in the last few months there. Decided I'd have to get down and do something.
And apparently you did, was it a figure a month or something like that?
Oh, you have heard about it. Yes, that was the thing I got on to. I used to do a nude a month. The nude of the month. My memory was getting a bit stretched by then, so they didn't altogether come out right. But it helped pass the time, and I must admit, I've never regretted that.
No.
Never ever.
And have you still got the chess set?
Yes.
What do you remember then about the actual end of the war, the liberation?
Well, not as shown in that film. That never ought to have been published. No, the end of the film actually it took place over, should we say, a couple of days, because the Americans arrived on the hill opposite Colditz. Apparently, they saw the Union Jack, which someone had put on the roof, so they didn't shoot it. But anyhow, they then had a little battle in a village upstream, and we could watch that. It was great fun until a shell hit the roof or hit the side of the building and actually knocked poor old Barter off his feet. It didn't hit him, but it was just the hitting into the building that did it. And then it was a fairly quiet night. And then the following morning we saw them coming across the bridge, and by then every single house in Colditz had a white sheet hanging out, or white flag, or what you will. And they'd given up trying to blow the bridge down with bazookas. And these two chaps came up into the castle, and they were a bit shaken with the sort of cheering and reception they got, but they never unshipped their rifles, never. And from then on, we've sort of had a constant stream of Americans coming in. And one of the great things was that on their way down, they'd passed through one of the German supply depots, and one was offered, would you like a long drink or a short drink? And if you wanted asked for long, you got a bottle of champagne. If you wanted a short, you got a bottle of liqueur. And it was really quite fun. They were very good.
Then after a few days you were lorried off to an airfield somewhere.
A very few days. I would have thought, memory being actually appalling, but I would have thought 2, 3 at the most. We were lorried off in empty supply trucks, all driven by black drivers, very fast, brilliantly. We weren't used to that. And I think we went to Erfurt, I think was the place, where we were transferred into Dakotas, and the following day flown back to England. And
can you remember the reception when you got back? Presumably there was a debriefing session.
Oh, but not immediately.
No?
No, the reception in England, it was a camp somewhere near Uckfield, I think. Although I'm not, or even no, it could have been Uxbridge. I think it was Uxbridge. I'm not sure now. Where we were deloused pretty thoroughly and given clean clothes and a new uniform and that sort of thing, and allowed to phone home, or given the wherewithal to phone home, and I think the following day given our warrant and told to go home. Now the debriefing took place, well, I should have thought almost several months later.
Really?
But certainly several weeks later, when we went up to MI9 in one of those hotels near one of the railway stations. I can't remember it now. No, well, I mean, there were so many of us that, I mean, there was little point in debriefing, particularly as the war had ended. What could they debrief us for? Yeah.
So did you then stay in the army, or?
Oh yes, I did.
You did?
Yes. Again, I was too sick to do anything else. And I enjoyed it in the army.
And you stayed in until?
Until I retired, which was at the maximum age, 55. Mark you, that's about 25 or 27 years ago. But, oh no, I was very happy.
That's great. I think we've covered everything now, George.
Well, that's great.
Thank you so much for letting me come.